most women don't realize the very thing they spend their lives avoiding is the thing that holds their freedom. They run from pain, from shame, from that invisible scar left by the first time they were told in words or silence, "You are not enough." So they chase perfection. They give. They perform. They beg with their silence and please with their sacrifice. But the ache doesn't go away. It lingers, like a ghost with no name. And beneath all the striving, all the seeking is a wound. Unseen, unhealed, unclaimed. The wound isn't your enemy. It is your origin. Somewhere in her story, the girl became afraid, not just of others, but of her own truth. The moment she was ignored when she cried, she learned not to feel. The moment she was punished for speaking, she learned to be quiet. The moment love was withdrawn for simply being herself, she learned to perform. This was not weakness, it was adaptation, a survival instinct woven into the psyche. Her body remembered. Her nervous system built a map. Safety meant suppression. Connection meant compliance. And so the ego was born. The ego, this mask of control, rose to protect the wound. It crafted identities. It whispered lies in a voice that sounded like her own. Be better. Be less needy. Don't show too much. Stay pretty, stay small, stay chosen. But the wound beneath still throbbed. That wound is not a flaw. It is a portal. In Jungian language, this is the shadow, the part of the psyche cast out because it was unacceptable to the people whose love you depended on. Not because it was evil, but because it threatened the balance of power, the wildness of the feminine, the full spectrum of emotion, the need that could not be ignored. So it was silenced. But what is silenced does not die. It festers, it distorts. It shows up in the partners you choose, the ones who love like your absence, the ones who withhold, who invalidate, who only want you when you're convenient. It shows up in your own self-abandonment, in the way you betray your boundaries, in the way you give more than you mean and resent it later. The wound is not only pain, it is memory, and it longs to be seen. But to face it is terrifying, because it means admitting the roles you've played were masks, that the life you built may not be yours, that the self you protect is not the self you are. And yet, that is the turning point. The moment the old self crumbles, the death of illusion, the rebirth of worth. Some women arrive at this moment shattered, after betrayal, after loss, after chasing something so long it dissolves in their hands. Others come quietly, tired of performing, empty from praise that never fills. They stand at the threshold where the wound waits like a locked door. And the key is self-confrontation. Not judgment, not fixing, not bypassing with spiritual light, but honest dissent. The archetype that guides her is the shadowed flame. She is not soft light. She is fire from the underworld. She burns away illusion. She asks for sacrifice, not of your soul, but of your false self, the one who begged, the one who earned love with obedience, the one who smiled while bleeding. She demands that you see the wound, not as weakness, but as the birthplace of your truth. The wound is where your voice was lost, where your boundaries were broken, where your instinct was gaslit. And the moment you face it, not to analyze it, but to feel it, you begin to transform. This is emotional alchemy. Grief becomes wisdom. Anger becomes clarity. Fear becomes sovereignty. But you cannot skip the burning. The burning is what makes the truth yours. The woman who dares to walk through this fire will not come out untouched. She loses people, roles, the praise of those who only loved her performance. She is called cold, difficult, intense. But what she gains is herself. She becomes the one who no longer begs for love, the one who does not chase, the one who sits in silence and does not fear her own voice, the one who can say no and feel peace, the one who does not trade her truth for approval. She is not perfect, she is real. And her wound, it is still there, but it no longer bleeds, it glows. Like a scar turned to gold, like a map drawn in fire. And yet many resist, not because they lack strength, but because they were taught to survive without themselves. They were taught that worth is proven through sacrifice, that being chosen matters more than choosing, that if they just loved harder, stayed sweeter, stayed silent longer, someone would finally see them. This is the lie the wounded feminine carries, the lie of being too much and never enough, the illusion that she must shrink to fit inside another's comfort. It seeps into her thoughts like poison. It tells her that boundaries are cruelty, that self-respect is selfish, that walking away means failure, that stillness is laziness, that softness makes her weak. But what if none of it was true? What if your ache to be loved was never wrong, but it was misdirected? The hunger for love becomes dangerous only when you forget your own worth in the process of seeking it. Because when you do, you hand your value over like a bargaining chip, hoping someone else will tell you what it's worth. But they can't, and they won't, not because you're unworthy, but because no one can give you back what you've never claimed for yourself. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of projection, that what we reject or lose inside, we unconsciously seek outside. A woman who has abandoned her own voice will seek a man who speaks for her. A woman who has repressed her rage will attract those who provoke it. A woman who hides her need will chase someone emotionally unavailable, so she never has to face the risk of being seen. Projection is the psyche's way of asking for integration. Not punishment, not chaos, but reunion. It is not the partner who causes the wound, they activate it. They become the mirror, the trigger, the invitation. And most women respond in one of two ways. They collapse into old patterns or they rise through reflection. The collapse feels familiar. It feels like anxiety in your chest, like waiting for a text, like explaining yourself over and over, like crying without clarity, like bargaining for crumbs and calling it love. But the reflection, it's different. It's silent. It's brutal. It feels like loss, but it leads to liberation. To reflect is to ask, what part of me is still begging to be chosen by someone who can't see me? This is the beginning of inner authority, where the woman turns inward and instead of trying to be wanted, she wonders why she wants what hurts her. She sees that her desire isn't always her intuition, it can be a trauma echo. That what feels like chemistry can actually be chaos. That love isn't adrenaline or fear or possession. It is recognition, respect, resonance. And before she finds it in another, she must become it within. This is the work of individuation, not becoming better but becoming whole. The process of integrating what was left behind. The anger, the wildness, the tears, the clarity, the power. It is not neat, it is not pretty, it is not always graceful, but it is sacred. And it requires that she break one final illusion. That healing will make her lovable. No, healing will make her sovereign. The woman who believes her worth lies in being healed will stay trapped in the performance. She will keep fixing, keep reading, keep doing the work as a way to become enough. But true healing happens the moment she stops trying to become and remembers who she is. The one beneath the wound. The one who was never broken. The one who simply forgot her name. And now she begins to remember. But memory is not passive. It is a ritual, a resurrection. Each time she says no to what no longer serves, she remembers. Each time she walks away without apologizing, she remembers. Each time she cries without shame, expresses without fear, rests without guilt, she remembers. The world may not understand her, but she was not born to be understood. She was born to be free. She becomes the embodiment of the shadowed flame, not just one who feels deeply, but one who has forged her identity in that depth. She is not afraid to descend. She is not afraid to burn, because she knows what rises from the ashes. Her love is no longer transaction, it is truth. Her body is no longer a battlefield, it is a temple. Her voice is no longer an echo, it is her own. And her wound becomes her wisdom. There is a moment in every woman's life when silence becomes unbearable. Not the silence of solitude, but the silence inside, where her truth lives locked behind years of pleasing, proving, performing. The silence where she swallowed her needs, hid her anger, and wore a smile over a scream. And one day the mask cracks. Maybe slowly, like water wearing down stone. Maybe suddenly, like glass shattering from the pressure. But it cracks. And through that crack, light leaks in. Not the light of joy, not yet, but the raw, blinding light of truth. It is the truth that says, "This life I'm living is not mine." It is the ache that knows, "I have betrayed myself for the comfort of others." This is not self-pity. It is the beginning of awakening. The Jungian path is not about fixing the self. It is about remembering the self behind the persona, the social mask that forms to win love and avoid rejection. A woman becomes what the world praises: beautiful, kind, agreeable, accommodating. But in doing so, she exiles the parts of herself that cannot be domesticated: her fury, her power, her sexual sovereignty, her divine no. These parts are banished into the shadow. And the more she suppresses them, the more they seek expression in distorted ways. Emotional outbursts, people-pleasing, attraction to cruelty, or numbness masked as strength. She may think she's in control, but control is not the same as freedom. Control is fear in a tailored suit. So what is freedom? It is the willingness to become unfamiliar to others in order to become unforgettable to yourself. The woman who chooses this path does not emerge unscathed. She is misread, misjudged, misnamed, too cold, too intense, too difficult. She does not care, because she has touched something deeper than approval: her own presence. This is the reclamation of self-worth. Not a feeling, a knowing. A knowing that says, "I do not have to chase, explain, perform, or beg." A knowing that says, "I do not belong where my silence is required to be loved." A knowing that is not loud but immovable. This kind of woman unnerves people. She no longer reacts the way she once did. She doesn't argue to be heard. She doesn't collapse into apology when someone is uncomfortable. She doesn't confuse conflict with failure. Why? Because she has stood in front of her wound and chosen not to run. She has sat in the discomfort of her own absence and found herself. She has grieved the years she spent trying to be someone else and forgiven herself. She has looked into the abyss of her longing and seen not lack, but power. This is inner alchemy, the transmutation of pain into presence. The shadowed flame, now embodied, walks not with vengeance, but with clarity. She does not seek to punish the world for the ways it failed her. She simply refuses to abandon herself again. This quiet refusal is radical. It changes how she loves. She no longer loves with fear. She loves with truth. She no longer gives to earn. She gives from overflow. She no longer waits to be chosen. She chooses. Her standards are not walls, they are mirrors. What you meet in her is what you carry. If you come with games, you will meet silence. If you come with depth, you will find oceans. She is not hard to love, she is hard to deceive. That is the difference. And here is where the deeper paradox lies. The wound that once felt like shame becomes the source of her magnetism. The very place she hid now becomes where others feel most seen, not because she saves them, but because she no longer needs saving. Her presence gives permission to feel, to speak, to break the old patterns. The woman who reclaims her worth becomes an archetype, a frequency, a reminder to others of what they abandoned in themselves. This is her quiet power. Not dominance, not submission, resonance. And yet this journey is not linear. There are days the wound feels raw again, moments she forgets, slips, returns to the old shape, but now she catches it, she sees it, and instead of shame, she meets herself with devotion. Because self-worth is not perfection, it is loyalty. Loyalty to your own becoming. Loyalty to the voice that says, I am no longer who I was, and I am not yet who I will become, but I will not abandon myself to be loved. There is a strange grief that arrives when a woman finally chooses herself, not because she regrets it, but because she realizes how long she didn't. She sees how many moments she watered herself down just to keep someone else comfortable, how many red flags she painted white in the name of love, how often she bit her tongue until it bled, smiled while breaking, stayed while dying inside. This grief is sacred. It is the soul's reckoning. It does not ask for pity, it asks for presence. Because the truth is, self-worth is not built through affirmations and surface-level self-care. It is built in the raw, aching moments when you choose not to betray yourself again, even when everything in you wants to return to what is familiar. And often, what is familiar is pain. This is the paradox. The wound becomes home, and so healing feels like exile. A woman can spend so long inside patterns of abandonment, rejection, or codependence that safety feels suspicious. Calm feels boring. Love feels undeserved. So she sabotages, withdraws, clings, performs, and then wonders why it always ends the same. But it is not because she is broken. It is because her nervous system memorized chaos as love. It is because the child within her learned that love is earned, not given. That closeness comes at the cost of herself. To break this cycle is not to become harder, it is to become more whole. Jung called this the return of the inner child, the innocent one, wounded by a world that misunderstood her softness as weakness. She became the caretaker, the pleaser, the good girl. And in doing so, she buried her rage, her desire, her voice. But it never disappeared. It waits, patiently, in the dark. The journey back to self-worth is the journey of remembering her. Not to coddle her, but to liberate her. The woman who chooses this path begins to notice something. Her body starts speaking louder, not with illness, but with instinct. A tight chest around certain people, a feeling of being drained in certain spaces, a quiet but persistent no beneath the surface. This is not anxiety, it's wisdom. The body always knows before the mind catches up, but only when we stop silencing it, only when we stop gaslighting our own into it. Iron in the name of keeping the peace, only when we stop asking others to validate what we already feel. The woman who listens becomes dangerous, not to others, but to the systems that once fed on her silence. She no longer entertains conversations that cost her energy. She no longer explains her boundaries to people committed to misunderstanding her. She no longer tolerates proximity as proof of loyalty. She knows that not everyone who stays loves her, and not everyone who leaves is a loss. Because she has stopped negotiating her worth. There is a moment, quiet and uncelebrated, when she realizes she no longer wants to prove herself. Not to men, not to friends, not to family, not to the world. She doesn't need to be understood to feel valid. She doesn't need to be desired to feel beautiful. She doesn't need to be agreed with to know she's right. This is the real empowerment. Not a curated version of confidence, but a deep, embodied truth that radiates from within. A soft, steady pulse that says, "I know who I am, and that is enough." This doesn't mean she stops hurting. It means she stops abandoning herself in her hurt. She learns how to hold her pain without letting it define her. She learns how to cry without believing it makes her weak. She learns that sensitivity is not a liability, it's a superpower when owned. And now she becomes magnetic. Not because she tries to be, but because she's free. Free women draw attention not through performance but through presence. She doesn't chase, she attracts. Not with manipulation, but with energy. The kind of energy that comes from knowing you are whole, whether anyone recognizes it or not. She may still stumble, she may still ache, she may still forget at times how far she's come. But she remembers faster now. And each time she remembers, she comes home to herself. And in doing so, she becomes the archetype she once searched for. Not a fantasy, a foundation, not perfection, embodiment. She becomes the one the wounded girl inside her always hoped would arrive. She becomes her own rescue, her own route, her own return. Somewhere in the quiet spaces between what she says and what she truly means, between what she does and what she deeply desires, a woman begins to hear the voice she once buried. It's faint at first, shaky, covered in years of conditioning, but it's hers. And once she hears it, she can never unhear it again. It speaks not in demands, but in declarations. I am not here to be chosen by someone who cannot choose themselves. I am not here to prove my softness by being endlessly forgiving. I am not here to shrink just so someone else feels big enough to stay. These are not affirmations. These are sacred boundaries, and boundaries are not about walls, they are about clarity. Clarity is the oxygen of self-worth. Without it, a woman drowns in the murky waters of confusion, half-commitments, and almost loves. But now she sees. She sees how she gave so much just to be given so little, how she tolerated emotional starvation and called it loyalty, how she kept choosing the same person in different faces, thinking maybe this time it will be different. But it was, and it wouldn't be, not until she broke the cycle at its root. And the root is not them, it's her story. The story she was told and the one she unconsciously told herself about what love is supposed to feel like, what womanhood is supposed to look like, what success is supposed to require. That story was never hers. It was inherited, conditioned, ingrained. To rewrite it is to risk everything that once made her feel safe. But safety is not always the same as love. Sometimes, safety is the padded cell of the false self. Comfort becomes a cage when the soul is ready to evolve. And so, she chooses discomfort not for chaos, but for truth. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." She understands this now. She sees how she projected her unmet needs onto lovers who could never meet them, how she played out the roles of caretaker, temptress, fixer, or muse, not from choice, but from a compulsion to be worthy, to matter, to belong, even at the cost of herself. But she doesn't play those roles anymore. Now she witnesses her patterns with reverence, not judgment. She asks herself, what was I trying to protect? And the answer is always the same. The girl inside her who once learned that being too much meant being left, and being herself meant being unsafe. So she softened, she silenced, she smiled when she wanted to scream. Until now. Now the shadow is not her enemy, It is her mirror. It shows her what she still hides, what she still fears, what she still seeks in others that she refuses to give herself. And she no longer flinches at the sight of it. She welcomes it. She walks into it. Because the woman who integrates her shadow becomes unstoppable. She is not perfect, she is whole. She no longer needs to be everything to everyone. She only needs to be true, and truth has a frequency. It resonates. It repels what's false and attracts what's aligned. It filters without effort. This is her new power, effortless filtration. She doesn't chase love. She doesn't convince people to stay. She doesn't explain her worth to the unwilling. She becomes the still point in a spinning world, not because she forces herself to be calm, but because she knows who she is beneath the storm. And now when she speaks, she doesn't ask for agreement, she declares. When she walks, she doesn't wonder if she's too much. She moves with intention. When she loves, she doesn't lose herself. She expands within herself. Her presence is no longer about being desirable. It's about being undeniable. And yes, this confuses people who only knew her in her shrinking. Those who fed on her availability, her kindness without boundaries, her silence when wronged. But she doesn't exist for their comfort. She exists for her becoming. And becoming is a shedding. Not a loss, a return. Not a collapse, an emergence. Not a rebellion, a remembrance. She is not becoming something new. She is unbecoming what never belonged. And in that unraveling, she finds her original self. The woman who never needed to be fixed, only found, only heard, only honored. And now she no longer fears being alone, because she is no longer lonely within herself. She walks with her own depth, dances with her own shadow, breathes in her own light. She is not waiting to be seen, she is finally seeing herself. This is the root of self-worth. Not a crown placed by others, but a flame lit from within. Type continue to receive the next part. And so the flame grows, not wild, not chaotic, but steady, grounded, sacred. It does not demand to be witnessed, it simply is, and in its presence the false must fall away. The pretenders, the projections, the pale imitations of intimacy that once felt like love. Now they are seen for what they truly were, mirrors without depth, rooms without doors. She no longer walks into those rooms. Because now she remembers, the wound was never the end, it was the portal. The portal to truth, to power, to integration. This is not the kind of healing that makes her lighter, prettier, or more palatable. It is the kind that makes her whole. The kind that burns through illusion and reveals the raw, pulsing heart of a woman who will no longer abandon herself. Not for love, not for approval, not for safety. She begins to reclaim her choices not from shame but from understanding. She sees how every yes she didn't mean was a cry for belonging, how every silence was a survival tactic, how every compromise was a coded message from the girl inside, whispering, "Don't leave me behind again." And she doesn't, not this time. This time she stays with herself, through the ache, through the loneliness, through the excruciating clarity of awakening. She no longer trades authenticity for attachment, because she finally understands real love doesn't require that exchange. Real love begins within. It does not fill the void. It dissolves the illusion of emptiness. It does not complete her, it reflects what was whole all along, and anything less than that is no longer enough. The high priestess within her knows this. She does not chase, she does not beg, she does not compete. Because she is not in the game. She has risen above it, cloaked in silence, rooted in self-respect. She listens not with ears but with intuition. She speaks not to be heard but to declare. She acts not from urgency but from clarity. And when the world tries to rush her to seduce her back into the familiar cycles of proving, pleasing, performing, she smiles gently and stays still. Because in stillness, she remembers what the chaos tried to make her forget, that her value was never in her usefulness, that her essence was never negotiable, that she was born whole and the world simply taught her to forget. But forgetting is not final. There is a rhythm to remembering. It comes in waves, in breakdowns, in moments of piercing silence. It comes when she walks away from what she once begged for, when she chooses herself not as a backup plan but as the beginning. This choice, this return, terrifies the parts of her that were trained to earn love. It shatters the scripts she once performed. But the cost of staying in the old play is far greater than the fear of stepping off the stage, because the role she played was never her truth. It was survival dressed as identity. And she is done surviving. Now she lives. She lives in full expression, no longer diluted, no longer delayed. She speaks the hard truth, even when her voice shakes. She lets go without needing closure. She forgives without inviting back. She loves without losing herself. And this version of her, this woman who chooses herself over comfort, is dangerous to everything that once exploited her doubt. Because she is no longer confused, no longer starving, no longer searching. She has become the very thing she once chased. Security, belonging, worth, all forged within the temple of her own psyche. This is the alchemy of the feminine, the descent into shadow, the facing of the wound, the rising through the fire. And on the other side, not perfection but power, not control but clarity, not a savior but sovereignty. This is the journey, not a straight line, not a checklist, a spiral, a dance, a death and rebirth again and again, each time deeper, each time truer. She does not emerge unscathed, but she emerges unmistakable. Not because others see her, but because she finally sees herself. And the woman who sees herself cannot be unseen. There comes a moment, not loud, not dramatic, when she no longer asks, "What do they think of me?" but instead, "What do I know of myself?" That is the crossing. The old self does not announce her departure. She simply fades like fog dissolving in sunlight. What remains is not a better woman, not a prettier woman, not a woman more pleasing to the world, but a woman who is finally real. This is the culmination of the Jungian path. Not a destination, but an awakening. To see clearly not just the world around her, but the battlefield within, the war between her learned roles and her authentic self, the quiet manipulations of shame, the soft lies of not enough, the ancient urge to become smaller, quieter, easier to love. But she doesn't comply anymore, because now she knows the source. She knows that when she begged for crumbs, it wasn't because she lacked dignity. It was because she thought crumbs were all she deserved. She knows that the fear of being too much was never about being loud. It was about being seen. She knows that the ache she once mistook for love was often just emotional chaos echoing her earliest wounds. And she no longer calls that love. She calls it what it was: trauma reenactment, attachment addiction, self-abandonment wrapped in romantic fantasy. Now she loves differently. She doesn't rush. She doesn't perform. She doesn't shrink. She chooses with the calm of a woman who has already survived the worst, her own forgetting. There is a new silence in her now, not the silence of suppression, but the silence of self-possession, the kind that unsettles anyone who only knew her in her performance. They call her cold, aloof, guarded. She smiles, because they confuse self-respect with distance. boundaries with walls, healing with hardness. But she is not hard, she is clear. And clarity for those addicted to ambiguity will always feel like rejection. Let them feel it. She is not here to explain her evolution to those committed to misunderstanding her. She is here to walk in alignment, not to be agreeable, not to be desired, but to be true. And truth doesn't beg to be liked. It simply is. She no longer hopes to be chosen, because now she chooses, and that choice begins with herself, her time, her energy, her body, her heart, her voice, no longer given away by default, no longer traded for attention, no longer sacrificed for the illusion of belonging. And this changes everything. Men feel it. They approach her differently now, or not at all, because her energy no longer says, "Please pick me." It says, "I already have." She doesn't need to prove her softness anymore. It lives in her grace, in the way she forgives, not because they deserve it, but because she does, in the way she lets go without revenge, in the way she ends cycles without bitterness, only truth. She doesn't need to advertise her strength either. It speaks in her silence, in her refusal to re-engage dysfunction, in the way she walks away without theatrics, in the way she doesn't chase what retreats. She simply is. And that is enough. The high priestess within her is not interested in performance. She is interested in presence. She is interested in peace. She is interested in alignment so deep, so embodied, that nothing outside her can unseat it. She has become a sanctuary unto herself. And now she finally understands what the wound was for. It was not a punishment. It was an initiation. A test of remembrance. A threshold to self. It cracked the mask. It exposed the false gods. It burned down the illusions. And in its wreckage, she met the most sacred version of herself. The one who never needed fixing, only permission. The one who held her worth like a quiet flame through every storm. This is where the path ends and begins again. Because healing is not a final chapter. It is a rhythm, a returning, a remembering. Again and again, she comes home to herself. And each time she stays longer. Each time she bows deeper. Each time she chooses herself more swiftly, more surely, more softly. Until one day, she no longer doubts the choice. And the world, once so loud in her ears, becomes quiet. And she hears herself clearly. And she follows. She doesn't need the world to understand her anymore. She just needs to. Never forget herself again. Share the moment you felt most empowered in the comments below. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.